Will we be done by the time he gets here? Good. Check. Check.
All right, that one's working.
Good. There's no public comment tonight.
No,
Right.
no. All right. Okay, good evening, everyone. It is 5:02 on Monday, January 17th. I'd like to call to order a special meeting of the Wausau Board of Education. The order of business, or the item on the order of business tonight would be discussion of the initial resolution authorizing general obligation bonds in the amount not to exceed $119,800,000. There was a lot of robust discussion for the last year plus. There were some direction given to administration last week, and Bob, I believe you guys are coming back now with a culmination of all of that direction. Take it away.
Thank you. Yes, there was some excellent discussion last week, Monday, and the board gave some pretty clear direction. As a matter of fact, I repeated that direction to make sure I understood it clearly, but the board was interested in a question that was significantly less than the $181 million question we had last week, and as a matter of fact, we cut 1/3 of it. And also in that question, we wanted to remain inclusive of all safety and security measures at all of our schools. We also wanted to include the investments that we had been talking about at our secondary schools, including the Horace Mann addition that included the Montessori school. We also wanted to include everything at the school forest that had previously been included in all of our discussions. And that's exactly what we did. So we came back with a proposal that was down to $119.8 million. The tax impact on that is estimated. Every bond issue is unique. And we do have some flexibility wrapping new debt issues around existing debt issues. And the number that I came up with, that's about a $2 million reduction in levy. And if you want to put that in terms of mill rate, that's about a 43-cent mill rate reduction. So instead of the 12-cent mill rate increase we had been talking about, we're talking about a 43-cent reduction in mill rate. Other than that, all of the features that this most recent referendum question highlights is in this document. So this document is in board book, and with that, the dollar amounts for every one of our buildings is included as a subcategory. And there was also a question about what this does to our capacity relative to current enrollments. Okay, if we use current enrollments, that's not the entire story, because our applied population lab study does suggest that we're seeing considerable growth in Stettin and South Mountain areas. But relative to our current capacity and our current enrollment, you see that in board book also. And there was an additional request for breaking down the deferred maintenance items at East High School in particular. So at East High School, this facility, asphalt, sidewalks, and curbs, about $1.9 million, LED lighting upgrades, $1.6 million, and then there were several other smaller ones that in aggregate added up to $1.1 million. So those are the deferred maintenance costs included for East High School. Obviously, I'll be here to answer any questions that you might have while you continue this discussion, along with the rest of our team, administrative team. Nexus is also here to help us answer some questions. We don't do this alone. The very next morning, as a matter of fact, we were working on exactly what you asked us to work on, and we spent the greater portion of Tuesday doing that. So with that, I'll answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Much of what is in here, I agree, I think it is fairly self-explanatory, but I know that there were viewpoints on several different aspects of it. So I would like to follow the same approach that we did last week, not necessarily going through the entire 181 million as we did. Now we have it whittled down. I'd like to keep the focus on what we have in front of us and talk through what we see as the positive side of this. What are any adjustments at this point that anyone is passionate about? We certainly want to hear all of those concerns and make sure that we have, at the end of the day, something wrapped up that we think is going to best serve the entire district going forward. So I will withhold my comments until the end, but certainly we'll open it up, or we can start in an orderly fashion like we did last time. Jane? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
We talked about we're keeping the safety, but the addition of the cafeteria, getting the kids out of the gym, especially at many schools, there are danger hazards. That's a safety and health issue too, but it's not going to be done. The overlooking of the schools that have the highest poverty and minority.
I'm sorry,
removing that-
can you say that again? Doing what with the schools with minority and poverty?
that they're being ignored, the elementary schools, or being significantly reduced. But we need to pass a referendum, and I will vote for this, but we have to understand that the items that have been cut are going to come back down the road. They're going to be more expensive, and we aren't going to have the use of these items until that happens.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Lowe?
Yeah, so I have some questions about some of the numbers here, so Bob can answer them. So on this bottom line here, it says district-wide, and then there is, so from December, it was 8,400,000, and then now with this new total, it actually increased by twofold. Now it's 15,700,000. Why did that increase so drastically?
From the last question, we didn't have turf, and that is included, as the write-up suggests. Field turf is included in the district-wide total. District-wide total includes classroom technology, displays, fiber, and so forth, $3.8 million. Furniture, the same exact allocation that we had a week ago, $4.5 million. Infield only, softball and baseball at both high schools, and a multi-purpose field, soccer, football, lacrosse, at each high school, and each one of those is $2.39 million. There is also some lighting at East High School for $979,000 and some lighting at West High School for $1.3 million. All of those things were in the discussion from just before Christmas. I believe it was December 20th, and they continue to be in the question.
Okay, so where were those numbers before in December? Because it was at 8 million before, and now it's double that. Were they?
If we're looking at the chart that's up on the top of the screen right now, you will recall that in December, that chart had separate categories for field turf alone. There was an East High School and a West High School, and there was an East High field turf, and there was a West High field turf. So they got replaced in the district-wide total.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but the turf was only about 4 million. Where was everything else?
The classroom technology was always in the district-wide total. The replacement of furniture was always in the district-wide total. The lighting was at East High School and at West High School, so they were included in East and West. And the field turf did go up slightly after further investigation, 2.391, I believe. Per school, it was 2.1 something or maybe 2.2.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Another question, so Horace Mann and John Muir, it looks like their totals went up from December to this new one. They both went up by $102,000 each. And so what is that increase in $102,000?
I don't know that off the top of my head, unless Larry is going to be able to offer something, or my friends from Nexus, 102,000 out of $12 million. I'm sorry, I don't have that committed to memory, and I don't have it in front of me. Backup generators. And I think now is a good time to remember and remind ourselves that these are interconnected in so many different ways. And it's not completely a la carte that we could go from a list of facility improvement measures and just take out, take out, take out every time. And this was a lot of our discussion on Tuesday morning. We talked about if we remove this, how does it compromise this, this, or this? So it's not necessarily the entire project was a sum of a bunch of smaller parts that we can just pick and choose. So it's a good time to remind ourselves of that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the reminder. I guess I have one more question about the numbers. I'm going to have more questions after this, but so in December, we saw individually the turf listed out in the pricing of the referendum. How come it was the decision now to leave that out of this chart?
It's in the chart, it's in the district-wide facility line item, and in our internal discussion, in December, I believe, maybe even in the first meeting in January, we had two motions that the board considered, and both of them were to take turf out of consideration, and both of those motions didn't receive a second, so we didn't think the board was all that interested in removing turf. So we include it in the district-wide total for that reason. And that also wasn't one of the options for exclusion last week. Last week, you saw my board report that included several different things that would allow the board to pick and choose what they didn't want. We already knew what the turf total was, and the board was not going in that direction, so I didn't include that.
Thank you. Because, just a comment, I would have preferred if the turf was listed individually and the cost for the turf as well, because that is a controversial topic, and so I think it's important for our constituents to see the individual price tag on that. So just a comment. You don't need to respond to that if you don't want to.
Okay. Anything else, Ms. Lowe?
I'm done for now.
Mr. Webster?
I appreciate all the hard work you guys put into this in such a short period of time. I agree with Jane to the extent that in making this budget, we know that what the boards are going to have to do in the future is take a much closer look at the elementary schools and at the way we're handling some of our facilities and demographics. On the other hand, I think it's a really excellent compromise, and you really did a good job, and thank you.
Welcome and thank you, and I think it's also worth noting that based on the board's recommendation from last week, preliminarily, we are building a financing plan that does allow the taxes to go down now and go down again in 3 years to provide just that opportunity if the board wants to go there. So there is a built-in opportunity for just that.
Good to know. Thank you, Bob. Jim, I'm going to wait on you. I'm going to keep moving. Karen?
I too want to thank you so much, Bob, and Nexus and anyone else who is working on this in the short time. I am really pleased. I'm actually really, really pleased with this. I think it addresses our priority needs. I'm thrilled that the safety and security is being addressed at every building, and it's addressing our classroom space needs where we have overcapacity issues, and for Montessori, I think that's still critical that we need to move forward with, and dealing with the deferred maintenance, and also significantly reducing the amount that's being brought to the community that I find is a great compromise and really fiscally responsible. So I appreciate the work. I think people will be excited that the mill rate will be coming down, and so I'm thrilled with this. So thank you for the work.
Thank you, Karen. Mr. Kreischer.
I agree with a lot of what Karen had to say. I guess I just had a couple questions. Bob, can you, or maybe even Nexus can answer this, about how much does a secure entrance cost at one of our elementary schools, roughly? I know it varies
Sure.
based on what has to be done.
Yep. If you're familiar with some of our schools, let's compare Lincoln to Grant, for example. Lincoln has a front entrance that's close to the office, and you could construct a secure entrance at Lincoln with essentially some storefront windows placed in that big entry area, and you could redirect traffic into the office. It'd be pretty inexpensive to do that at Lincoln. And as the numbers bear out at Lincoln, $214,000. Maine, similar. You get the idea. Grant, on the other hand, if you're familiar with Grant, and you come in from where that new gym is and you go up the steps and you go down the steps, it's kind of a split level going on. To make a secure entrance there, you almost have to bring the office to the ground level. You want to bring the office to grade, and in doing that, you have to build on some square footage. So you have to make a little bit of an addition. So you'll also see the Grant addition, just for secure entrance, $2 million. So we're building on some new square footage at Grant to bring that whole office up front where an entrance would be and build on some square footage. Similar at Hawthorne Hills. Hawthorne Hills, I think, is a larger number up there, $2.6 million. But also at Hawthorne Hills is the back road and all the grading that goes along with it. So every school is a little bit different. Some schools are pretty easy to add secure entrances to, while others are a little bit more challenging. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it helps explain, what's going on at those two facilities. I guess you had some things peeled off on the document talking about at East, lighting and asphalt, and I guess a couple of questions. One, have we looked at applying any ESSER funds to, not necessarily the asphalt, right? I know there's rules as to what that can be used for, but certainly I would think that there's the ability to apply it to some things that are in especially technology and things of that nature. Is that being done, or?
Yes, it is, and we already have invested some of our available ESSER money. You saw firsthand the new handrails at West, right? Okay, so that's an example. So we are using some of our ESSER money to invest in safety, security, some things of that nature. Dollar amount, hard to really move the needle on a $120 million project, but we're doing that. We are investing some of it. This current state budget put us in a little bit of a predicament, and some lawmakers have said it out loud. Some have suggested, we're not going to give you new money, but you've got all this federal money, and maybe you could use that to keep the lights burning and keep the operational expenses paid for. So we did that. Last year in March, we had some budget requests. Some of it was for personnel, and pandemic recovery, personnel is real. We need to spend money on some personnel for recovery and getting things back to as normal as possible. So we're already using some of that ESSER money for personnel. We're already using some of the ESSER money for masks and sanitizer and things that, and upgrading some of our HVAC systems, but tough to really move the needle. I think our entire ESSER allocation, including for personnel, is like $14 million over 4 years.
Okay. And then I guess the items that you had earmarked for East, I guess I'm curious, they're dollar amounts that I'm wondering if the board would be open to maybe we don't include those to get this down just a little bit further, and then if we're able to, throughout the project, find other areas of savings, fold them back into, that sort of approach. If we find that a particular given project didn't cost us as much, we'd be able to fold asphalt and the lighting back into the east, plan. I think that's kind of why you had them earmarked a little bit.
We have a lot of things earmarked, but those were specifically referenced last week. I think, Mr. Boucher, you asked for a breakdown of the deferred maintenance at East. So we have similar breakdowns at other schools. Every one of them has a list of deferred maintenance. And if you concentrate on the question itself, if you approve the question tonight, and if the voters approve the question, the numbers will change from different allocation of where you carried budget for deferred maintenance at East versus where you carried budget for deferred maintenance at West versus every other building. You have flexibility to do that. It's already built in. As long as you adhere to what we say when we go out with our information campaign, and as long as we adhere to what's in the question itself, the board does have that authority. And we can pay for things that we didn't think we had room for, or in some cases, things do come in over budget, and then we have to eliminate things. So we already have our list started right there, that deferred maintenance list at East.
Okay. And I'll just, I guess, reiterate, kind of what I said last week, in that I think there's some agreement that I have with Jane in that, obviously we're not addressing some of the needs at the elementary level, but I think that's going to take this district and this community to take a real hard look at our consolidation, the footprint of our district and what consolidation means. And it doesn't have to be a scary, divisive thing and, pitting people against each other. It's just an honest and open discussion that we need to have. We have declining enrollment, we have demographic shift, and we have staffing shortages that we are going to have to, we're already seeing, these things, and hence why we're having to address some space issues at some of the schools. I think this is a plan that, although it doesn't get us all the way to the finish line, it does a lot of great things. And I think that I just think that the district and community is going to have a real honest conversation about, our facility footprint, and it doesn't have to be, a very big debate. I mean, it's just addressing the footprint needs of this district, and how we can prepare, the district for the future and for, a space that these students can succeed in. That's all I have.
I think others have said sort of what I was planning to say. I agree with the comments about there still being more elementary work that needs to be done. I think Jane's point brought that up, and John and Lee spoke to it as well. And I don't think any board members have suggested that some of the additional options for elementary schools aren't needed. I think everybody has supported them. It's more an issue of timing, an issue of, John mentioned, of a more of a strategic long-term study, and then the question of actually passing a referendum. I think I said in a meeting or two before, I'd rather pass part of what we want than pass none of what we want. So I know that there are people in the community and on the board that would like to do more with the elementary schools, and some that would like to do less, some even to do nothing with the elementary schools at this time. But I think we've reached a pretty good compromise here that I can support. It provides the safe and secure entrances to every single elementary building, and provides some additional classroom space to our 3 most crowded schools. So I think we reached if this is what we go forward with, I think it's a good compromise, certainly something I can support.
Well, this is always hard being on the end because everybody kind of makes comments that you already kind of agree with. I agree with everything that John and Karen have said, and even what Jane has said, and Lance. So I really don't have much to add other than I do want to emphasize just the need to really strategically plan for the future of the district with what John had mentioned, declining enrollment and demographic shifts and staff shortages. I think those are very important. And so I think that this referendum, and I appreciate all the hard work you guys did to come back with this in such short notice. And I think that this is something that I can definitely support at this point, and we can at least get something moving and get the district better in those areas that we can, and then have a serious conversation in the future. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Mr. Boucher?
Well, I'm going to agree with Cody on that one, being at the end here, you have a tendency of repeating a lot of things that have already been said and answered. But I do want to give you and your team a lot of credit for working on all of this. But there always are some comments that come about based on not being aware of what the numbers represent. And you did talk about the grant in the Hawthorne Hills. If people have been in those buildings, they would understand that there is an up and down. And matter of fact, when I walked through Grant, I kept on thinking, how would I do this? That would be tough. But it is a lot of money. There's no doubt about that. And that goes back to what we were talking about, or a couple people have already stated. We need to have a good conversation about when do we take a look at buildings and when do we now back off of some of these buildings. But that's not the question right now. You answered the question that I had as well, Bob, and I appreciate that. The other question was when numbers are just thrown in front of people, like $15 million for district. Right away, even I looked at that, but then understanding that there were a lot of things that weren't mentioned here that I'm sure are in that, but I'm going to ask the question based on the fact that the people in our district are asking those questions. So you've answered them, but now I think going forward, people need to see that. You know, they need to see what's that district-wide mean, because it goes back to the old, and heaven forbid we ever use the term again, slush fund. You know, that kind of goes back to the old term of slush funds. And so enumerating things in district-wide, again, you're talking with people that have gone through buildings, and we have talked about this for a long period of time, but I can also take the side of the taxpayer and say, what does that mean? You know, how does that fit in there? What are we talking about? So those are the questions I think need to be enumerated for the community so that they know, and that becomes very transparent as far as I'm concerned. But those were the couple of questions I had taking a look at this. I still, and again, you made the comment, one elimination affects another elimination. Having worked with rebuilds and things of that fashion, I get that. But I also look at the buildings in greatest need, and I stated it last week, that when you take a look at a building of 60 years and a building of 50 years and a building of 25 years, it's a big difference of the need there versus a building of only 15 years old when we take a look at the secondary. And you know that I push for the secondary. Not that I have anything against the elementary, because elementary is the foundation for middle school and secondary school here at the high school level. So consequently, we do have to pick our choices here and do it wisely. So anyway, I'm kind of summarizing what everybody stated here, but those things do need to be identified so the community knows.
Exactly. I agree with everything you're saying. And if we think about the detail that we offered the last time with a dedicated website just for the referendum, that's the kind of detail we're committed to. In a week's time, maybe there wasn't as much detail here as everybody craved, and that's why I'm trying to answer everybody's questions tonight. But there will be much, much more detail, similar to the way we had detail in the April 21 referendum, and probably even to a greater degree, because the community wants even more detail. Think about the detail we offered then. It will be crystal clear how much money will be at least carried in the budget for field turf, how much will be carried in the budget for secure entrances, LED lighting, classroom additions. We'll give much, much more detail. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Yes.
So I was thinking of it like that here. So currently, there is no air conditioning at Grant. Is that included with this?
No air conditioning at Grant, no air conditioning at Franklin, no air conditioning at John Marshall. Parts of, okay. And those were not considered safety and security, and the board gave direction to include safety and security only, so no. they are not included.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, you know, I liked the last the last plan better than I do this one. And the only problem I had with the last one, the old one back in December, was the turf. I felt like the turf really wasn't needed. But now as I look at this new number and all of the changes that were made to this question, it's very lopsided. There are certain schools that are getting almost everything that was in the last plan, and then there are schools that are not going to get, they're only going to get a little bit. And I have a problem with that, because why should a parent or someone who is living by Grant and Lincoln be paying the same to get less, and then a parent living in another part of the district paying the same and getting more for their kids? So that's the problem that I have with this. I really wish that this would have been more equal all across the board, but it's not. I do like the price tag of 119 million. I like that, but what I don't like is it's not equal across all schools. So that's my problem. Someone in Wausau shouldn't be paying the same thing and getting less than another parent living in another part of the district paying the same and getting more for their kids. I see a problem with that. The other problem that I see is that Grant and Lincoln, again, they are the highest population of students that are low income and in poverty, and minority kids. And most of those minority kids are Hmong. I'm Hmong. And I do not agree with that my people are going to get less and pay the same. And then another school, somewhere else, they're going to pay the same and get more. To me, that is unacceptable. And we're going to do this to our kids, our Hmong kids, on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. That is so unacceptable to me. And I will be voting no for this based simply on that, because it's unfair, it's lopsided, and, you know, to be frank, this referendum is classist. It really is.
A misrepresentation to say that some are going to get what others aren't. Nobody's getting the extra gym or cafeteria, no school. We're adding on a couple of classrooms where it's needed because of population growth and shift. So I think it's a complete misrepresentation. 80% of this referendum is going to secondary, which benefits every single student in this district. So I just think it's a complete misrepresentation. I think it's sad to continue to divide the community based on race and class and things of that nature. There's many other minority and impoverished kids that go to plenty of these other schools. It's just sad that that's what it devolves into.
Have an example that you could share with us in terms of a school that is still getting everything and one that, like you said, Lincoln or Grant, that's not? I just want to make sure we're all tracking here.
Were you asking me? Were you asking me? I'm
Yes,
sorry.
if you could share an example. You said that, some schools are still getting everything that was in the original $181 million plan, and then others are getting nothing. I'm just wondering if we can have an example of that so we can, have a rational discussion over it and understand it better collectively.
If that's what you heard, that is not what I said. I said there are other schools that are getting almost everything that was in the original plan in December.
So which school is that?
I can tell you right now, South Mountain, Stettin, their price tag went down 33% 41%. And then if you're looking at Grant, their price tag went down 82%. Lincoln's went down 98%.
So South Mountain and Statine, we already know, those are where the additional classrooms are being built, so we have a higher cost to address where the population growth is happening. Okay? And if you look, if you take your examples here, and I was just doing some quick math, if you take Lincoln, Grant, are the two you mentioned, on average, we're spending $6,160 per student at those two schools with this referendum. If you look at Rib Mountain, Maine, were the two you referenced, and Hewitt, Texas, we're spending an average of $866. So $866 per student versus $6,160.
That's true, but Lincoln and Grant, they are not getting their renovations, which would add onto their learning experience. They're only getting safety, which does not add to the learning experience of the student. And I have a problem with that.
But that's consistent with the rest of the elementaries. As Lance said, we're not doing that, or John, I'm sorry, said we're not playing favorites with any of the schools relative to gymnasiums and cafeteria. We are still spending 9 times per student on these other schools that you identified. I think that's a good thing.
But they're getting learning. They're getting renovations that are going to affect their learning environment. Lincoln and Grant is not.
Yeah,
Because they're, I don't know if you looked at page 2, that outlines the overcapacity. The overcapacity that's happening at those buildings, it's not added learning, it's added space for students because there's no room. They're overcapacity. So I just want to make sure I'm clear. You're going to vote against safety and security at all of our elementary school buildings because you somehow think this is inequitable for 2 buildings. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not voting against safety and security.
Well, that's what we're bringing to every elementary school with this referendum.
Nope, do not twist my words like that. I am not voting no because I'm against safety and security. I'm voting no because the highest number of minority kids and low-income kids are going to pay the same, their families are going to pay the same for less. That is what I'm voting against.
Don't bear that out, but if that's a position, that's a position, and that's fine.
One other thing I would add that John mentioned is that, because I agree with Ka to the extent that there are more things that need to be done in our elementary schools, and none of the schools are getting the requested changes and upgrades to learning spaces and STEAM rooms and all. None of the schools are getting that. All they're getting is the secure entrances, safety, and then the classroom space. So I agree more that there's more that needs to be done. I disagree with this concept of where you live and how much you pay. I mean, if we actually were gonna to play that game, the schools that have been mentioned are West Side schools, which are the students that are gonna benefit the most from this plan, since this is primarily a secondary plan. The new plan we have is primarily a plan for secondary schools. So if anything, the elementary students on the west side are the ones that would benefit the most from it, since they're going to be attending John Muir and West, which are the biggest benefactors, so to speak, of this plan. And Jim had mentioned earlier about the difference in the school age, and that's an important thing, I think, as part of our informational campaign to explain why Wausau West and John Muir are so much larger price tags than East and Horace Mann. I don't think we should assume that everyone out there understands just how old those buildings are compared to the East Side buildings. I mean, that's the reason why the price tag is so much higher on the West Side. So I think that should be part of the informational campaign as well. But I think we have more to do at the elementary schools, no doubt. I just...
Okay.
Do at the elementary schools, And this referendum addresses facility. We are not addressing many of the other components that are already part of the curriculum and special services that are added to some of those schools where there's more desperate need. So we do need to be looking at all of this as we're moving down into the future. But right now, we need to get this referendum passed, and it really does benefit everybody once they get to the secondary level.
I think we hit it right on the head. We have desperate needs in some of our elementary schools. I don't know if we all took the tour of Lincoln School, but when we saw that ESL room and how dysfunctional that room is, but we're not going to do anything with that because we're doing stuff to the building. And doing stuff to the building, while it may keep kids safer, it doesn't add to their educational experience. I just am so concerned that, I don't know, when I think of health and safety and security, to me, the air conditioning at these buildings where these kids on the 3rd floor cook in the summer, that's a safety issue. I mean, the summers seem to be getting hotter. Well, statistically, they are getting hotter. And these kids aren't learning in that environment. And we're going to push it down the road. It just boggles my mind.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I certainly don't have to go into detail on everything else that everyone has so eloquently summarized. Sorry.
We have to look at what past boards have done and take that in consideration. Part of the reason for the separate cafeteria and gymnasium is safety. It also causes us to use our staff more efficiently and do a better job with education for our kids. But it is also that some schools have gotten those in past referendums, and not everybody's going to get one and get that upgrade each one. But the plan basically has been, we put them on as we do more and more referendums, because that's how it works. We really need to educate the public. We are not a business. We don't run our finances like a business in any way. And I think we need to spend some time helping them understand why we have to do referendums. We can't save and then do additions. And I think that gets lost sometimes.
I think you're absolutely right. Public education, educating the public on this, whether it was 180 million, 120, or 20 million, is going to be absolutely core to, and has been core to the attempts that have been made historically to try to pass this thing. So, and I agree with you, it clearly does not address everything. And there's going to be a new board in a few months that is going to have to start tackling some extremely challenging issues that everyone here has brought up. But if we start looking at what it does do, and as everyone here again has said, when I summarize it in my head, right, it does get the safe and secure entrances. It does address elementary growth where it's happening. It does address the Montessori issue that we've had for a number of years. It does address the growth at John Muir and West, the maintenance at Horseman and East, and drops a mill rate from our original by a net of 55 cents from the 181 million. To accomplish all of those things and to be able to take advantage of also reducing the property taxes from a taxpayer's perspective, I think it's a good plan. I think it's a fair compromise. I think it is a balance between needs and taking into consideration all of those, the items that Jane mentioned, age of buildings and things of that nature, but still be able to offer relief to the taxpayers, I think is significant. And there was one comment I know that I heard someone said, well, we don't have to just plug the entire opportunity that we have with our tax bills with something new. And that one really resonated with me. This isn't doing that. I mean, we decreased it, Bob, I think you said by a third. And depending on how we can structure debt, today versus 3 years from now too, we can see another impact to taxes. So collectively, I think it is a very, very good plan. I think strategically it aligns with the foundation of where we want to go. There is very little in here, I think, that is going to be not needed long-term, regardless of where we go. Yes, there still may be some, but in the interest of safety and security of all of our students, staff, and the visitors, I don't think that's anything that we should compromise on, and I'm glad to hear that no one else feels that way too. So overall, I think it's a good plan. Bob and everyone that you worked with on this, Larry, all others, Dr. Hiltz, I know you've been silent here, but thank you guys. I think this is a good plan to put forward, and I think that there's something in here for all of the voters to get behind, and it'll be our jobs to collectively sell this to the extent that we want to make that happen. So, all right, having said that, this will be a roll call vote. I am seeking a motion to be it resolved by the school board of the Wausau School District, Marathon County, Wisconsin, that there shall be issued pursuant to Chapter 67 of the Wisconsin statutes, general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $119,800,000 for the public purpose of paying the cost of school building and facility improvement project consisting of district-wide safety and security, school updates, building infrastructure, capital maintenance, and site improvements, remodeling at all middle and high schools, construction of additions at Horseman and John Muir Middle Schools, West and East High Schools, and Grant, Riverview, South Mountain, and Statine Elementary Schools, construction of a new school forest environmental learning center, and acquisition of furnishings, fixtures, and equipment.
Second.
All right. We have a first and a second. Roll call, please.
Jim Boucher?
Yes.
John Frazier? Yes. Todd Lowe? No. Cody Nicolai?
Yes.
Jane Rush? Yes. Lance Trollope?
Yes.
Karen Vandenberg? Yes. Lee Webster?
Yes.
Pat McKee?
Yes.
8-1.
Thank you. So the next item is also an action item, a resolution for providing for a referendum election on the question of the approval of an initial resolution authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $119,800,000. Administration will request the Board of Education consider the following resolution to ask voters to consider the referendum question on April 5th, 2022. The referendum question would ask voters for authority to issue bonds for the purpose of capital improvements in an amount not to exceed $119,800,000. This is also going to be a roll call vote. I am seeking a motion to approve the presented referendum resolution calling for an April 5th, 2022 referendum election.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
John Frazier?
Yes.
Todd Lowe? No. Cody Nicolai?
Yes.
Jane Rush? Yes. Lance Trollope?
Yes.
Karen Vandenberg? Yes. Lee Webster?
Yes.
Jim Boucher?
Yes.
Pat McKee?
Yes.
8-1.
Thank you, everyone. With that, I am seeking a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.